Good morning, everybody. My name is Sharon Feigon. I'm the Executive Director and the founder of the Shared Use Mobility Center. And I hope many of you were able to join us for the warm-up. It looked like that was a pretty full room. And so now you're stretched out and ready for this incredible 2 days of learning and interacting with the leaders of transit and shared mobility as we together think about the ongoing challenges and plan for the future where we can provide environmentally sound, affordable, and safe mobility for all. So I know this is an incredibly challenging time and that we find ourselves in, and even having a virtual summit is another kind of challenge, but this is very important work we need to do, and we're just thrilled that you're all able to be a part of this. So right now I'm going to go to thank yous, and this is really important. First, I want to thank the summit team. This event did not happen in a day, and we actually had spent months preparing for our annual in-person summit, which we were going to hold in mid-March. And we had to cancel it a week before it was to take place. And here you can see on the screen, here is our staff. This is how we work now. We're all on Zoom all day long, talking to each other and working on things. And so I wanted to tell you, though, that the site of our summit actually became a field hospital caring for overflow patients from area hospitals. So a very important use went to the site of our summit. I also want to just thank the whole staff, especially the summit staff, Kimberly, Leslie, Rudy, Israel, Linda, and everyone else who's jumped in. It takes a lot of technical support to make this happen and a lot of planning. So please, a big round of applause in your participant list for all of the staff. I also want to thank our board that's been extremely helpful, and a special shout out to Kevin McLaughlin, who is a new board member and is coordinating the Startup Spotlight. And then I want to thank our sponsors. And I think we have a screen with all the sponsors. These folks stuck with us as we moved from the in-person summit to the virtual summit, and it's really because of them and their support that we were actually able to keep going with this virtual summit. So, so much appreciation to all of them. And now I want to talk to you about the Shared Use Mobility Center, the place we find ourselves today, and what we hope to accomplish at this summit. So I'm going to start out with some history, but I did want to first note that, much has changed, obviously, in the last 2 months. But I think seeing a little bit of where we came from will help us understand the path forward as well. So I want to talk, I want to start with our founding, which was in 2014. We are 6 years old, and the Shared Use Mobility Center has really kind of grown as this field has grown, as this industry has grown. And we started very early on at the beginning with the Federal Transit Administration, thinking about mobility on demand, testing out new pilots. We started very early with the Air Resources Board, talking about car sharing, how to implement it in disadvantaged communities, and creating a pilot like that in Los Angeles. And we also worked really closely with a lot of the different companies, and they kind of came over to our office to learn about how car sharing, because I had been a car sharing operator. So when we got started, car sharing and bike sharing were the shared mobility modes that were most prevalent. And the TNCs were just kind of in their early days, and there was a lot of fear that that they would be, that people wouldn't want to ride with strangers. And so many of the companies that are around today had 1 or 2 employees when we were starting out, and they were searching for their business models, hoping mobility would somehow become profitable. And many of you in this audience here, many of you have worked in all phases of the shared mobility field, industry. You know, some of you started out in the public sector, you moved to the private sector, you moved to the nonprofit, you moved back again. So there's been a lot of dynamism, a lot of innovation, and a lot of hope for mobility for all. And we've all been struggling to figure out how this can work, how we can serve the public interest, but still take advantage of the opportunities out there. So we at SumC have sought from the start to find solutions that would really level the playing field for disadvantaged communities, provide mobility that could lead to better jobs, and at the same time address the looming issues of climate change and the need to reduce VMT and auto usage. So we've seen progress, we've seen innovation, we've seen excitement, we've seen changing business models, the growth of the TNCs, on-demand transportation, new modes, and this promise that somehow we would get at a multimodal transportation system. But we've also, as you know, seen bureaucratic obstacles, we've seen agencies working in silos, we've seen very aggressive companies not wanting to share, holding tight to their intellectual property, pushing their way to make change. And we've also seen in the land use side, gentrification, displacement, disparities, big disparities between rich and poor. And so we've seen progress in electrification and environmentalism, and a lot of stalled out plans and baby steps of success. And at the beginning of this year, at the beginning of 2020, which feels so long ago now with all the other things that have happened, but we saw many transit agencies, the FTA, aspiring to multimodal private-public partnerships, talking about the need to go from pilot to scale, cities laying plans for more focus on reclaiming streets, expanding active transportation for transit improvements, new initiatives, looking for new funding, and more baby steps. And we also heard transit agencies, and a lot of us, for the first time really talking in a more serious way about the idea that transit might be free or very reduced, that a way to induce demand was in fact to just look at it as a utility and a necessity. So that's kind of where we were at in a very general way. And then, wow, the pandemic hit. And so what we then have seen are some dramatic shifts. We have seen record low transit ridership everywhere. We've seen TNCs and scooter companies and others with layoffs. Now we're also seeing some more consolidation, record low revenue, dried up revenue sources, and the most vulnerable people who are not just, haven't just been screwed by transit and food deserts, but actually dying from unsafe conditions while working at low wage jobs. We've seen single occupancy vehicles increasing in the places around the world where recovery is starting. And at the same time, the hopeful part is there is a glimmer of experimentation, innovation, some cities getting to try out ideas they've wanted to try for a long time, more space for people, closing streets, rear bus boarding, redoing routing in a quick and efficient way, and thinking about transit service throughout the day, and maybe not so many in the peak in the future. So we're all thinking about new ways of doing business, new business models, more work from home for those who can, and more delivery services. So I'm not giving any answers. I am saying this summit is the place to talk about all that. We know we have to address climate change. We have said we need resiliency and we need flexibility to do that. And clearly we need a lot more of that right now. So how do we stay the course with reducing auto use? How do we make all these modes safe? How do we make transit appealing? We were struggling before, now we have a bigger issue. And finally, how do we take the need to address these giant disparities between rich and poor, the have and have-nots? This is something that has really come into the very clear, I think, during this pandemic, and we need to address it. So how do we make these changes, and how do we make them in a timely way when we're all practicing social distancing? And frankly, a lot of us are pretty disturbed and depressed. So these are the questions, and more for the summit. This is the work that SumC will do with you after the summit. We are committed to it. We have an amazing email list, thousands and thousands and thousands of people in every state in this country, a lot of other countries, from the public sector, from the private sector, from civic groups. We have a lot of people interested, and we want to activate that constituency to join with all of you as we go forward in new testing grounds, new policies, and new research and convening. So thank you for being with us this morning, and we really appreciate your participation. And now, I would like to introduce Gia Biagi. Gia is the Commissioner of Transportation of Chicago. Gia is a planner and a designer with experience in the private and public sectors. She was appointed Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Transportation by Mayor Lori Lightfoot not very long ago. She was appointed in December 2019. And the mayor charged Biagi with no small plans with implementing a vision for a transportation system that prioritizes equity and mobility and works to lower the economic and environmental burden of transportation on residents and communities, especially for people in poverty, people with disabilities. And so she's going to tell us how she's going about that big goal that she was hired with, and what she's working on, and what Chicago is doing to address both the immediate and longer term issues regarding transportation in this COVID and hopefully post-COVID period coming up. So thank you. Gia, take it away.
Thank you. Amazing. 295 plus people got online. I hope folks are wearing pants and not just in their pajamas. But so first, thank you to Sharon and for the team at the Shared Mobility Summit. What a thing to transition from doing something in person to doing something online. So I'm already amazed, like we made it here together. People did yoga. So that's a good signal. So again, thank you for inviting Chicago to the table in our hometown here. And we're happy to share with you a little bit about what's going on in Chicago. And in fact, I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully, Israel, that will work out. Can you see my screen? Hold on. There, is that working?
Yep, yep.
All right. So welcome to Chicago, except virtually. And of course, I think it's Tuesday, could be Wednesday. None of us are really sure these days. But we would have loved to have had you here. And in fact, I think this image of Chicago is a nice cross-section of what you'd see. And I know there are many folks on the line who live here and work here or visit. But this is, I think, emblematic of what Chicago is all about when it comes to transit and transportation, right? It's this confluence of things. We have rail, we have our bridges that are moving material throughout the city. We have parks, rivers, all of those things. And your cities have them too. Of course, we think Chicago has a particular kind of confluence of these pieces where we're thinking about our open space in alignment with our public spaces and our movement and our places. And really, as part of the introduction talked about my design background, I spent a lot of my career thinking about place and how we share spaces together and how we move through them. And so as we're thinking through the reappropriation perhaps of our public way for different kinds of uses, in COVID and post-COVID, there are all kinds of ways that we think we can leverage this infrastructure to do things differently, to really take advantage of what we learned in this process and move forward. So again, so welcome. So that's me on the right with our amazing Dr. Arwady, who is leading our Chicago Department of Public Health and really, along with the mayor, leading our COVID response. She hosts a live stream every 11 o'clock Central Time that is allowing folks to write in their questions, and every day she's there to answer them and communicate, and occasionally has special guests like myself, which yesterday was, I know it was yesterday, was part of opening up the dialogue with the public about how their streets could be used differently. What's happening now? What is the local lived experience of folks? And so we're moving down that road, but always hand in glove with the data. Chicago, we are still working on flattening our curve. As of yesterday, we have still not hit our peak. And so every city is different. And I think that that is true whether it's during the time of a pandemic or not. And so we're moving carefully ahead to make sure that what we're doing is in concert with the local lived experience of people in communities. So, of course, a little about the Department of Transportation. Every Department of Transportation is maybe a little different. We're from policy to potholes. So we've got your streets, your alleys, sidewalk, lights, bridges, all of that infrastructure, as well as our policies around mobility and resilience. And really, what does it mean to address some of the bigger challenges that our city is facing as a whole, these adaptive challenges. A pandemic is an adaptive challenge that also has some technical components to react to it. But those are the kinds of big questions that we're looking to say, what can our transportation department do to move the needle on these big public policy questions? So I do very much wish you all were here, because if you were here, we'd have you, enjoy the weather, which actually starts to be nice. It's not nice today, but it starts to get really nice this time of year. Or you could, go to Millennium Park and see the lovely fountain that we have there, or even go to the lakefront, all of those things that we love to do. But as you can see, our mayor, who has been leading an incredible response to COVID, makes very clear that even if it's nice out, we need to stay at home and stay safe. And I think her approach to both having strong guidelines in place, being very direct, but at the same time having a sense of humor about it, even as we know we've had to close our Lakefront Trail, which is one of the most popular trails in the country, having to make sure that we have people do what they need to do to social distance at a time where, again, it's still, we're still trying to bend that curve. So we also have this rock star mayor that will do whatever it takes to get people to stay home and save lives. And I think it's really emblematic of the approach in each city needing to be different. How do you speak to audiences about getting folks to do what they need to do to make sure that we're reducing the number of cases, reducing the fatalities and all of that. And so I'm really proud to be part of this administration that has prioritized really critical lenses that we need to look at the work that we do through. So this is a little more emblematic of what's going on in Chicago. These are all images of what you'd see all around our city. you can see that we've got all different kinds of uses of our public way, right? And you're all experiencing these kinds of things. This is what it looks like in Chicago, whether it's curbside pickup of free popcorn from a theater, whether it's folks that are praying in the street outside their churches, whether it's transforming what are normally modes of movement like a sidewalk into a place to play. These are all things that perhaps we never considered the possibility of, or did so in a pilot way or in a one-off kind of way. But there's an incredible movement in Chicago of really the human infrastructure coming out and taking care of each other. I'll point out a few here on the top left. Those are folks from our Chicago Fire Department who lost some of their own to COVID, and all of our departments are experiencing cases, and in many cases, fatalities. I'll point you to the bottom right of the screen where you can see a woman who's handing out masks, and a lot of these are community initiatives. While the city departments as a whole, of course, we're distributing masks and sanitizer and all kinds of things, and then we're also working with organizations to do that. There's also the everyday work of folks who are making PPE off of 3D printers in their homes and distributing it. There are all kinds of efforts together that I think really show ourselves and the world who we are here in Chicago. And I'll point you to the upper right photograph. That's a friend of mine, Burrell, who's part of a program called Purpose Over Pain. And these are all mothers who have lost their children to gun violence in Chicago. And the project was in working closely with parks like Millennium Park, who have big floral displays that people aren't going in to see because the parks are closed, and using those flowers to give to mothers on Mother's Day this week to commemorate the loss of their children. And so these pieces of Chicago's life in COVID also pull forth the fractures that we already have in our city that we are working on. And I think this set of vignettes is really laying a foundation for what's possible when we pull on the same rope together and move forward. So this is kind of a map, in a way, of the human infrastructure of our city right now. But when you think about the map that we really need to pay attention to, it looks more like this. So this is a map of City of Chicago, 1970 to 2017, and it's an income map. And you can see the distribution of very high income down to very low income. Very low income is in orange, very high income is in dark blue. Hopefully those colors come through on your screen. And you can see the concentrations of poverty and the concentrations of wealth. It's a dramatic depiction of the current state of many Chicagoans. And in fact, it is this map that we need to change. And this is the mayor's charge to all the departments, whether you're human services, whether you're business and consumer protection, or whether you're transportation, that we all need to say, what do we have in our hands that we can put forth as tools to change this map for the better? Because this map was absolutely a construct of policy decisions. It's not an accidental map. It's not a map that came out of inertia. There were choices along the way. So as we think about what we can do with the tools that we have, whether it's in the shared mobility space, whether it's infrastructure, those kinds of things, the question is, what do you put those tools in service of? And that's what we're moving toward with our transportation department and transit and our policies around movement and placemaking in this city. So that primary lens is equity. And this is actually an image from Chicago's Poverty Summit. This is before COVID is what it is now. And we were all asked, amongst hundreds of people from across the city that play different roles, whether you're a community-based organization or an artist, we were all asked to come together and ask ourselves what we would do to commit to improving the well-being and quality of life of Chicagoans. And for transportation and for the work that we're going to do here, this is a question of justice. How do we orient our organization toward poverty alleviation, toward listening and responding to marginalized communities? Because if we get that right, it's like the whole tent goes up together if we work with the margins and really focus on moving the needle on equity. That is one of those adaptive challenges. That is not something that there's a simple toolbox that I can take out the right wrench and we can get there. But it's something that we need to continuously move the needle on. And that is the framing for our transportation system. That is the framing for our policy. As we move forward, and if you work in Chicago or you will work with us, know that front of mind is this lens in everything that we do. So what cascades from there? Of course, mobility cascades from there. We have massive infrastructure projects like our new terminal at O'Hare, which is being built faster than ever because there aren't planes moving. And of course, we're taking advantage of all the opportunities to accelerate construction where it makes sense to do so, and you can do it at a safe social distance. And then what that means for access, right? And so that's our partnership with the CTA on our bus priority zones. Those are the kinds of work that we're going to do together as the CTA is doing a massive study of its whole bus network. This is where it kind of literally rubber meets the road. It's the most granular way that we can move folks around the city. And we know that we're going to have to work very hard together to make sure that our public transportation system is healthy and thriving and is still maintains and even becomes more important moving people around the city. And then, of course, investment, right? That's another important prong that cascades from this primary lens around equity. And so the choices we make, those policy decisions, where do I put a shovel in the ground, has everything to do with the prosperity of communities and how we lift up vulnerable populations. One of the projects here in Chicago that we're working on is called Invest South and West. And you remember those maps from the beginning? This is a map that is saying very prescriptively, we have 10 communities and 12 commercial corridors that are really at the heart of where we need to make change in terms of economic development, in terms of developing social and civic capital, in terms of moving the needle on that larger question about how do we end generational poverty, how do we address structural racism, how do we take on these very big challenges with the tools that we have. So the mayor has led this initiative with $1 billion worth of investment that will go into these neighborhoods and focusing particularly on that commercial corridor. So as a transportation organization, of course, what do we have to put in service of that question? How can we create livable, functional, inviting, welcoming streets? There's a way to do that during COVID. There's a way to make what you do in COVID the breadcrumbs toward a bigger vision for what our city could be. So these are vignettes, and I'm wrapping up here because who can take a Zoom call this long? But these are vignettes of what we're doing now, what we've done recently, and where we're headed. These are the same questions. These are questions that were on the table in late December when I started, and they're still the questions going forward. What do we do with the tools that we have to move the needle on these important questions? How do we make those great policy decisions that make for that change? So you can see these people, these pieces of infrastructure, the policies that are reflected in what you see before you as the foundation, the building blocks for going forward. And lastly, I'll say one of the things where we've already launched here at the Department of Transportation is a strategic planning effort. That is, we are working on now organizational development and aspirational development. How do you develop an organization that actually has metrics around equity? What does justice look like? How can we respond to what communities see as their primary concerns, and we do it at a localized way with that local lived experience driving, and then also thinking systemically. So we're strategic planning now, and maybe it sounds crazy, but if you don't talk about the future, which is what you're here to do, then the future might as well not exist. So I encourage you to take advantage of these 2 days together. I'm impressed. I don't think I could do 2 days, but that's amazing. Please do it because collaboration has to happen around these issues, that we need to build a future together, and we need everybody pulling on that same rope in the same direction as we come out of COVID and we walk into a new future that is addressing mobility, that is addressing access, that is addressing investment, all through this arc of bending, not just the curve, but bending our work toward justice. So with that, I would like to thank you so much for having me join you for a minute here. I know it's going to be a really important set of conversations. And again, thank you to Sharon and Mobility Summit for inviting me here to say a few words.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gia. I'm applauding you because you can't hear all the guests. But thanks for that really terrific introduction. And I must say, it's very heartening to see the pictures of Chicago, since we're spending so much time inside and not there.